The day high school seniors across Cedarhaven received their college decisions, my own graduation ceremony had just ended. Adrian Hawthorne came to meet me outside the campus with Celeste Monroe, his newly divorced former sister-in-law. He had barely offered me the sunflowers in his hand when Celeste brushed them aside with a laugh. Sunflowers? You could try harder if you're courting a young woman. Adrian smiled and handed the bouquet to her. Then you choose. Clara will like whatever you pick. I stood beside them without finding a place in the conversation. Celeste patted his shoulder. Your tie is crooked. There are too many people here for you to embarrass me. Adrian lowered his head and let her straighten it. After the graduation photographs, he drew Celeste close and told me, "You're good with a camera. Take a few more pictures of us." For 3 years, every movie meant for two came with a third ticket, and every anniversary dinner had been chosen around another woman's restrictions. I had protested before, but whenever the argument ended, I was always the one Adrian set aside. Then Celeste accidentally left her phone in my purse, and I saw the photograph on her lock screen. Across the image were the words, July 2nd, finally free. The same date was engraved beneath Adrian's watch. He called impatiently, "Clara, hurry. Celeste can't wait all day." I stared at the screen for several seconds and deleted the photograph. Everyone online was discussing how to choose the right college, and I finally understood something too. When the first choice is wrong, you withdraw before it is too late. There was no reason to keep a photograph of Adrian and me either. I slipped my phone into my purse and looked at Adrian Hawthorne, who stood a few yards away. He had lowered his head so Celeste Monroe could straighten his cufflinks. Her fingertips brushed his throat. He did not so much as flinch. The graduates around them laughed and began to tease. Adrian takes such good care of his former sister-in-law. Anyone watching would think they were the couple. Someone tossed out the joke. Adrian did not correct him. He only smiled and clapped the speaker on the shoulder. "Knock it off. Celeste has been sick. Of course I look after her." I took 2 steps back and turned toward the campus gates. The afternoon sun was painfully bright, but I never looked back. 10 minutes after I got into a cab, Adrian called. His voice was already accusing when I answered. "Where did you go? We were supposed to celebrate at your favorite sushi place. Celeste and I have been waiting outside the school forever." I watched the streets slide past the window. "I'm tired. I went home." Celeste coughed weakly in the background. Adrian's voice softened at once, though every word cut into me. "Clara, Celeste finalized her divorce today. This is her first time out since then. Couldn't you have stayed and supported her? You're usually so understanding. Why are you acting like this now?" My fingers tightened around the phone. I said I was tired. Enough with the attitude. I'll bring home those maple cream pastries you like. Be good. The cab radio was still running a special about college commitment season. The host said choosing the right path mattered more than working hard on the wrong one, and that people should cut their losses when they realized they had made a mistake. I smiled faintly. Apparently, that advice was not only for 18-year-olds. In the past, one quiet "be good" from Adrian had been enough to make me pretend nothing had happened. Before the call even ended, Celeste coughed again, and Adrian was already fussing over her. "Celeste, it's windy out here. Let me get you back to the car. What do you want to eat? Sushi might be too cold. How about soup instead?" I said nothing more and ended the call. I returned to the penthouse where Adrian and I had lived together for 3 years. After stepping inside, I changed my shoes and stared at the evidence of our shared life. The bird of paradise plant on the balcony had come from a charity auction because I once said I liked it. We had chosen the hand-woven pillows on the sofa together at the Claybrook Artisan Market. A framed photograph from our trip to North Star Ridge to see the northern lights still hung on the wall. Now every memory in the apartment looked ridiculous. I went into the study and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was my full scholarship acceptance letter from Northlake Academy of Art and Design in Port Sterling, New Albion. I had handled the paper so often that its edges were soft and wrinkled. The desire to leave had taken root long ago. Every time Adrian abandoned me to run to Celeste. Beneath the letter was a business card from Julian Mercer. He directed Northlake's visiting artist program. His email had contained one sentence. "If you decide to leave, I can arrange a safe, private trip." I ran my fingers over the sapphire bracelet on my wrist. It had belonged to Adrian's mother. He had fastened it around my wrist years ago and said I was the only woman he would ever welcome into the Hawthorne family. Yet for 3 years, all Celeste needed was a look, a sigh, or a cough, and Adrian would leave me without hesitation. He always said she was vulnerable, that her health was poor, and that the Hawthornes owed her. He simply forgot that I was his girlfriend. I removed the bracelet and placed it in the exact center of the coffee table. At 10 that night, the keypad lock chimed. Adrian came in from the cold carrying a box of my favorite maple cream pastries. The bakery was 12 miles in the opposite direction from the clinic, where Celeste had spent the day. He had made the detour anyway. He set the box on the table and found me reading on the couch. Then he came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. He rested his chin against my neck with practiced intimacy, his voice low and gentle. Are you still mad? Celeste has a serious heart condition. She can't be left alone. You're going to be my wife, part of the Hawthorne family. Could you help me take care of her? Celeste never asked Adrian outright to stay with her. She would simply murmur over the phone that he should not come because Clara might be upset. Then one breath later, she would cough until she could barely speak. I closed my book. I did not pull away. I only asked one question. Adrian, what does July 2nd mean? The date engraved on the back of your watch. His fingers paused on my shoulder. The hesitation was so brief that someone else might have missed it. It was the day I took over Hawthorne Group. He smiled and adjusted the necklace I was already wearing. Why are you asking about that all of a sudden? I studied his reflection in the mirror. Even when he lied, he remembered to make his voice softer. No reason. I was curious. Relief crossed his face. He took my hand and led me to the jewelry cabinet. He removed a diamond necklace worth more than most houses and fastened it around my throat. This is your graduation gift. At my 30th birthday gala next month, I'm going to introduce you properly. Clara, you'll be the most dazzling future Mrs. Hawthorne in Cedarhaven. He cupped my face as if he adored me. Without that date, I might truly have believed his love ran that deep. Adrian always thought expensive gifts and the title of Mrs. Hawthorne could make up for his absence from our relationship. He never understood that I did not want any of those things. I wanted to be the person he chose first. Then his phone rang. It was the ringtone he had assigned to one person. Adrian answered, and all the color drained from his face. Celeste, don't do anything. Put the knife down. I'm coming right now. He grabbed his keys and rushed for the door without even taking a coat. At the threshold, he looked back long enough to throw me an explanation. Clara, Celeste is having a breakdown. I have to go. Keep the necklace safe. I'll be back. The door slammed shut. The necklace pressed heavily against my collarbones. I looked at myself in the mirror. The diamonds still glittered, but I had never felt cheaper. He had not even bothered to invent a convincing lie. July 2nd was the day Celeste and Adrian's older brother finalized their divorce. It was the day Celeste had written that she was finally free. Adrian hid that shameful date beneath his watch while expecting me to wear his diamonds in public and protect his reputation. I stepped closer to the mirror and calmly unfastened the necklace. I dropped it into the trash with the unopened box of pastries. Then I opened my laptop. I signed a declaration declining any interest in Adrian's property, trusts, or future marital assets before relocating for school. I clicked send. When the confirmation appeared, I withdrew from our 3-year relationship with my own hand. From then on, Adrian was no longer my first choice. I organized the documents on my desk and shut down the computer. The apartment became so quiet that I could hear the clock ticking. I did not cry. I had exhausted my tears during countless nights spent waiting for him to come home. For the first time, the pressure in my chest began to ease. 1 month remained. After his birthday gala, I would leave Cedarhaven. I would leave the man who had made it impossible to breathe. The deadline for high school seniors to commit to colleges fell on the same day as Adrian's 30th birthday gala at Cedarhaven's most exclusive private club. He had commissioned a couture gown for me and led me through the ballroom by the hand. He introduced me to everyone as his fiancée. I played my part as the perfect partner. I smiled politely and made conversation with the various socialites. Inside, I counted down the days until my flight to Port Sterling. 3 days. The party was at its height when Celeste appeared. She wore a white gown that looked almost identical to mine. Her eyes were red, and she hovered timidly near the edge of the room. Adrian noticed her at once. He released my hand and hurried over to ask what was wrong. Women nearby began to whisper. They watched me standing alone with equal parts pity and amusement. So what if she's the official fiancé? One tear from the former sister-in-law and she disappears. Those matching dresses are interesting. I wonder which woman is the original, and which one is the substitute. Their mockery stirred nothing in me. If anything, I was bored. Then the evening turned violent. Adrian's older brother, Marcus Hawthorne, stormed into the ballroom. He reeked of alcohol, and rage filled his eyes. Celeste had divorced Marcus because of his affairs, drinking, and physical abuse. To protect the family name, the Hawthornes had told the public that the marriage ended peacefully over irreconcilable differences. Marcus spotted Celeste and laughed bitterly. You've got some nerve. You divorce me and immediately attach yourself to my brother? Celeste went pale and hid behind Adrian. Adrian stepped in front of her, his expression hardening. Marcus, this is my birthday. Don't start anything. The warning enraged him. He smashed the glass in his hand. I'm starting something? She's my ex-wife. You protect her so fiercely that you neglect your own girlfriend, and you still call yourself my brother. A shocked murmur swept through the ballroom. Standing in the crowd, I finally understood. Adrian always claimed Celeste was fragile because the divorce was so recent. It was not simply because she had nowhere else to turn. He believed the Hawthorne family owed her for what Marcus had done. Marcus suddenly shoved through the guests toward Celeste. The broken stem of his glass flashed in his hand. You ruined me, and now you're trying to ruin my brother? Adrian instinctively pulled Celeste into his arms. When he twisted to shield her, his elbow slammed into my shoulder. The jostling crowd sent me stumbling forward. I fell directly into the path of Marcus's swinging hand. Broken glass tore through my sleeve and into my arm. Blood spread across my white gown. Club security tackled Marcus within seconds. Still shaken, Adrian loosened his hold on the unharmed Celeste. Her knees buckled from fright. Adrian swept her into his arms and shouted in panic, "Call an ambulance." Celeste fainted. He carried her toward the exit. I sat on the floor clutching my arm while blood ran between my fingers. Adrian passed close enough to touch me, but he never slowed. He saw the blood on the floor and the color drained from my face. He chose Celeste anyway. As he disappeared through the doors, my tears finally fell. I remembered the night 3 years earlier when men cornered us in an alley. Adrian had fought his way in front of me and said, "No one touches my girl." The promise remained in my memory, but the man who made it had just walked past me. I called Adrian. When he answered, I heard him soothing Celeste to sleep. Before I could speak, he lowered his voice and said, "Celeste just fell asleep. Don't start a fight." I went to the emergency clinic alone. While the physician stitched my arm, a nurse asked whether anyone was coming for me. I did not answer. Anesthetic burned beneath my skin, and the sutures pulled at the wound. I stared at the ceiling and barely felt it. The worst pain had already passed when Adrian carried Celeste out without hesitating. I returned to the penthouse late that night and packed with steady hands. I took only a few older clothes. I left everything Adrian had bought. I folded 3 years of my life into one suitcase. Adrian finally came home the next afternoon. His gaze landed on the bandage around my arm, and he froze. Only then did he remember. I had been the woman he knocked down at his gala. He rushed toward me, then stopped as if he no longer knew how to touch me. "Clara, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. Celeste has a heart condition and I panicked. Hit me or yell at me, but why didn't you call?" I stepped away from his hand and answered calmly, "It's fine. I handled it. Adrian, our 3rd anniversary is the day after tomorrow. You promised we'd watch the sunrise from the bay." Relief flooded his face. With red eyes, he began making promises. "I'll be there. I'll clear my entire schedule and charter a boat. Afterward, we'll file for our marriage license. I arranged professional care for Celeste. From now on, I'll be with you." I looked into his remorseful, devoted eyes and smiled. "All right. I'll wait." On the night of our anniversary, I stood in Cedarhaven Metropolitan Airport with a small suitcase. Adrian had sent me a voice message 30 minutes earlier. In the background, Celeste was smashing glass. "Clara, Celeste is hurting herself. I have to stay with her. We can watch the sunrise tomorrow. Be good and wait for me." The boarding announcement began. I blocked Adrian on every messaging app and on my phone. Then I removed my old SIM card. I let out one quiet breath. There won't be a tomorrow, Adrian. You can keep July 2nd with her. I dropped the card into a trash bin and walked toward the premium boarding lane without hesitation. I had already cleared security. All that remained was boarding. Using my new number, I sent Julian a message. "Everything is going according to plan. I'm through security." At that moment, the privately operated advertising screens throughout the concourse went black. Red and white text flashed across them. Adrian had purchased an emergency public notice claiming I was missing and might be in danger. He had even posted an outrageous reward for information. Travelers stopped to stare and whisper. Then hurried footsteps sounded behind me. Adrian had reported a possible medical emergency, persuading the charter desk to place a brief hold on my departure, while security verified my safety. His elite business membership had also gotten him as far as the premium lounge before airport officers stopped him. A gate agent spoke urgently into her radio. "The Hawthorne account triggered the welfare hold, but the passenger has confirmed she's safe. Clear the premium lane now." I stiffened and turned. Adrian stood at the far end of the corridor without a coat. He wore only a thin dress shirt, open at the collar, his chest rising and falling hard. He advanced toward me, his voice raw. "Clara, where are you going?" The distance between the boarding gate and the glass lounge barrier was 30 feet. 30 feet of polished airport marble, lit by the harsh white glare of halogen lamps. Adrian took 3 heavy steps forward before the airport security officers stepped into his path. His hair was windblown, his shirt unbuttoned at the throat, his eyes bloodshot and wide with an emotion I had never seen on his face before. Panic. "Clara," he shouted again, his voice breaking through the hum of the terminal. The elite business membership that usually opened every door in Cedarhaven meant nothing to the 2 uniform officers standing between us. "Clara, stop. What are you doing? What is this?" I didn't step back. I didn't hide behind the gate agent. I simply stood there, my small carry-on handle gripped in my right hand, my left arm still wrapped in the fresh medical dressing beneath my sweater. I'm boarding my flight, Adrian, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet lane reserved for first-class passengers, it carried with absolute clarity. A flight? He laughed, a short, breathless sound that sounded almost frantic. He tried to push past the officer's shoulder, but the guard held his ground. Where? To Port Sterling? Because of that art program? Clara, we talked about this. You don't need to go to some school across the country. I bought you the studio in the cultural district. I hired the best tutors in Cedarhaven. You bought those things for your fiancé? I said softly. I pulled my passport from my coat pocket. The navy cover was smooth and cool. Beneath my thumb. I am not your fiancé, Adrian. He froze. The color, already faint in his cheeks, drained away completely. What are you talking about? He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he tapped the screen. Is this because of tonight? Because I couldn't make it to the bay? I told you Celeste was. Celeste was hurting herself. I finished for him. My tone was so flat, so utterly devoid of anger, that his hand stopped midair. She smashed a glass. She needed you. She always needs you. She has a heart condition, Clara. Adrian's voice rose, desperate to establish the familiar script. The script where he was the noble protector and I was the unreasonable, jealous girl. She was breaking down. What was I supposed to do? Leave her alone? Yes, I said. The word fell between us like a dropped stone. Adrian stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. What? Yes, Adrian. You were supposed to leave her alone. I looked at him really. Looked at him. Taking in the expensive watch on his wrist, the tailored trousers. The man I had spent 3 years molding my life around. You were supposed to choose me. Just once. On our anniversary. On my graduation. At your gala while I was bleeding on the floor. I didn't see the blood, he yelled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The security guards shifted, their hands dropping toward their belts. I panicked, Clara. I brought you the pastries. I bought you the diamond necklace. I gave you my mother's bracelet. The pastries are in the trash, I said calmly. The necklace is in the bin. Beside them. And your mother's bracelet is on the coffee table in the penthouse. He went entirely still. I signed the waiver declining any interest in your assets. I continued, handing my boarding pass to the gate agent. The machine beeped, a sharp, high electronic tone that signaled the end of my time in Cedarhaven. I blocked your number. I dropped my SIM card in the trash 5 minutes ago. I am leaving. Clara, no. Adrian lunged forward, his hands reaching past the guard's arm. You can't just throw 3 years away over a mistake. I didn't throw 3 years away, I said, stepping past the turnstile into the carpeted jet bridge. I turned back one last time to look at him. You traded them on July 2nd. The look that crossed his face was pure, unadulterated horror. He knew. In that single second, he realized that the secret he had worn beneath his watch face, the date he thought he had buried under expensive gifts and promises of a grand wedding, had been stripped bare. Clara. Goodbye, Adrian. The gate agent pressed the door release. The heavy glass door swung shut, locking with a dull, metallic click. I didn't look back again. The flight to Port Sterling was 4 hours long. I sat in seat 2A by the window, watching the city lights of Cedarhaven shrink into tiny, insignificant points of yellow before disappearing entirely beneath a blanket of gray cloud. The flight attendant offered me warm tea. I accepted it, resting the paper cup against my knee, watching the steam rise toward the reading light above my head. My arm throbbed beneath the bandage, a steady rhythmic ache that reminded me I was alive. For 3 years, my world had been bounded by the 4 walls of Adrian's penthouse, the schedule of his board meetings, and the unpredictable emergencies of Celeste Monroe. I had learned to speak quietly, so as not to disturb him when he was tired. I had learned to eat my meals cold when he was delayed. I had learned to dress in the muted pastels Celeste preferred because Adrian once mentioned that loud colors gave her headaches. I pulled my sketchbook from my bag, the one Julian Mercer had sent me along with my acceptance letter. On the first page, I had drawn a small, realistic portrait of a bird sitting inside an open cage. I turned the page. Using a charcoal pencil, I began to draw the view outside the oval window. Endless, dark sky, raw wind, and the wing of an airplane cutting cleanly through the clouds. When the plane touched down at Port Sterling International Airport at 3 in the morning, the air outside was cold and smelled of salt and wet asphalt. It was entirely different from the heavy, humid air of Cedarhaven. I walked through the arrival gates carrying my single suitcase. Julian Mercer was waiting near the exit. He wore an oversized dark coat, a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck, holding 2 paper cups of hot coffee. He didn't look like an executive or a benefactor. He looked like what he was, a senior instructor from an art academy who spent his life surrounded by paint and canvas. When he saw me, he didn't ask where my luggage was. He didn't ask why my arm was bandaged. He simply handed me a cup of coffee and smiled. "Welcome to Port Sterling, Clara. Your studio is ready." I took the cup. The warmth seeped into my fingers, spreading through my hands, up my arms and into my chest. "Thank you, Julian," I said. We walked out into the coastal night. Back in Cedarhaven, the penthouse was dark. Adrian arrived at 4 in the morning, unlocking the door with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He didn't turn on the main lights. He walked blindly through the hallway, his boots loud against the hardwood floor. "Clara," he called out. His voice sounded hollow in the empty space. "Clara, I know you're upset. I know you're trying to scare me." There was no answer. He walked into the living room. The bird of paradise plant sat in the corner, its long leaves dark against the window. The hand-woven pillows were arranged neatly on the sofa. On the glass coffee table in the center of the room lay a single item, the sapphire bracelet. The dark blue stones caught the faint moonlight coming through the blinds, glittering coldly against the polished glass. Adrian walked over, his knees feeling strangely weak. He picked up the bracelet. The metal was cold, so cold it felt like ice against his palm. He turned toward the kitchen. The kitchen counter was completely bare, save for two things sitting beside the sink. The unopened box of maple cream pastries from the bakery 12 miles away, and beside it, thrown casually into the stainless steel trash bin, was the velvet box containing the diamond necklace worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Adrian reached into the bin, his fingers brushing against discarded coffee grounds as he pulled the velvet box out. He opened it. The diamonds glittered beneath the fluorescent kitchen light, pristine, untouched, and utterly worthless. He ran into the bedroom. The closet doors were wide open. Half of the space was empty. All the custom dresses he had bought her, the silk gowns, the designer coats, they were all still hanging neatly on their padded hangers. The only things missing were her 3-year-old denim jacket, her worn canvas shoes, her paint-stained shirts, and her sketchbooks. She hadn't taken a single thing he had given her. She had stripped him out of her life as if he had been nothing more than an unpleasant coat she was forced to wear for a season. Adrian dropped to the edge of the bed, the sapphire bracelet clenched in his fist so tightly the metal prongs dug into his skin, drawing a thin drop of blood. His phone rang. The custom chime echoed through the silent apartment. "Celeste." He answered it mechanically, holding the phone to his ear without speaking. "Adrian." Celeste's voice was weak, trembling, accompanied by the familiar faint gasp for air. "Adrian, where are you? I had a nightmare. My chest feels so tight. Can you come back to the hospital?" For 3 years, that voice had been an absolute command. It was the summons that had pulled him away from dinners, from birthdays, from anniversaries, from a girl who stood bleeding on a ballroom floor. Adrian sat in the dark bedroom, looking at the empty hangers in Clara's closet. "No," he said. There was a silence on the line. "What?" Celeste whispered, her tone shifting slightly. "Adrian, I am sick." "I'm not coming, Celeste," Adrian said. His voice was flat, dead, devoid of the soft concern he had worn for 3 years. "Don't call me again tonight." He hung up and threw the phone onto the mattress. Then he buried his face in his hands and let out a single, ragged sob into the empty room. Northlake Academy of Art and Design sat on a hill overlooking the northern harbor of Port Sterling. The buildings were built of dark red brick, covered in ivy that turned crimson. In the autumn wind, the air always smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, wet clay, and sea salt. My scholarship included a small private studio on the 3rd floor of the fine arts building, a room with high ceilings, northern light, and an exposed brick wall. For the first 2 weeks, I barely left the room. I didn't attend the student mixers. I didn't explore the city. I worked. I painted on massive wooden panels 6 feet high, using heavy strokes of Prussian blue, burnt umber, and lead white. I painted the memory of the greenhouse at the Hawthorne estate where I had spent hundreds of hours waiting for Adrian to finish his phone calls. I painted the long dining table at the private club where 3 places were set for 2 people. Julian came into my studio on a Tuesday afternoon. He stood in front of a panel I had just finished. In the center of the canvas was a white couture dress hanging from an iron hook. The bottom half of the dress was soaked in a dark, thick crimson that pooled on a floor made of cracked glass. Beside the dress, a watch rested on a pedestal, its hands frozen at 7:02. Julian looked at it for 5 minutes without speaking. "What is the title?" he asked finally. "The Terms of Settlement," I said, wiping charcoal from my palms with a rag. Julian turned to look at me. His eyes were sharp, evaluating, not as a guardian, but as a curator. "It's brutal, Clara," he said quietly. "And it's the best work you've ever done. The annual Vanguard showcase is in 4 months. I want 5 more pieces like this." "Ikendoten," he replied. He smiled. "Don't burn yourself out. You're free now, Clara. Art shouldn't be your punishment. It should be your territory. My territory. I repeated those 2 words to myself after he left, looking out the studio window at the ships entering the harbor below. In Cedarhaven, my existence had been defined by what I surrendered. I surrendered my space, my time, my dignity, and my name, all to fit into the hollow frame Adrian had crafted for me. Here, every mark on the canvas was mine. Every decision was absolute. My arm healed, leaving a faint, thin white line across the skin near my elbow. I stopped covering it with long sleeves. In Cedarhaven, the autumn brought a different kind of storm. The Hawthorne Group's quarterly board meeting was a disaster. Marcus Hawthorne, stripped of his position after the gala incident, had filed a lawsuit against the family trust, alleging that Adrian had misused corporate funds to cover up personal scandals, specifically the private medical expenses and housing arrangements for Celeste Monroe. The press caught wind of the story. Headlines filled the local business journals. Hawthorne heir involved in family feud, former sister-in-law at center of financial audit. Adrian sat at the head of the boardroom table, his suit perfectly ironed, but his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. Clear the press, Adrian ordered his secretary coldly as the meeting ended. Get the legal team on Marcus's suit. I want him settled by Friday. Yes, Mr. Hawthorne, the secretary hesitated, standing by the door. Also, Mr. Hawthorne, the private investigator you hired. Adrian's head snapped up. Did he find her? The secretary placed a thin manila envelope on the table. Miss Clara Lee completely severed her legal address in Cedarhaven. Her bank account was closed 3 days after her departure. She transferred her tax file to Port Sterling, but what? Adrian demanded, grabbing the envelope. She registered under a private scholarship protection trust, the secretary said quietly. Her actual residential address is classified by the university. The investigator couldn't get past Northlake's legal counsel. They threatened a harassment suit if we continued inquiring. Adrian tore open the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, taken from across a street in Port Sterling. It showed me walking up the red brick steps of the Northlake Library. I was wearing an oversized black coat, a yellow scarf wrapped around my neck, carrying a large wooden portfolio case under one arm. My hair was shorter, cut cleanly at my shoulders. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking at the sky, smiling at something a fellow student beside me had said. It was a smile Adrian had not seen on my face for 3 years. A smile that had nothing to do with him, his wealth, or his promises. Adrian's fingers crushed the edges of the photograph. Book a flight to Port Sterling, he said, his voice raspy. Sir, the board meeting regarding the Marcus settlement is tomorrow. I said book the flight, he roared, slamming his hand onto the mahogany table. The secretary flinched, bowed her head, and hurried out of the room. Celeste stood outside the gates of the Hawthorne estate, wearing a thin white trench coat, her face pale, holding a bottle of heart medication in her hand. When Adrian's car pulled out of the driveway, she stepped directly into the road. The driver slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. Adrian didn't even flinch in the back seat. He lowered the window 3 inches. Move, Celeste, he said. His voice was colder than the autumn rain falling. Outside. Adrian. Celeste rushed to the door, pulling at the handle, but it was locked. Her eyes were wide, desperate, tears smearing her carefully applied makeup. You haven't answered my calls in 2 weeks. Marcus is suing me. The reporters are outside my apartment. You promised your brother you would take care of me. Adrian looked at her through the narrow gap in the window. For 3 years, he had viewed this woman as his sacred duty. He had believed that protecting her was a testament to his honor, his family's debt, his maturity. Now looking at her, he saw only a calculating, pathetic leech who had consumed 3 years of his life and driven away the only person who had ever loved him. For who he was, not what he owned. My brother is in rehab, Adrian said quietly. The family trust has revoked your stipend. The apartment in North Star Ridge has been put up for sale by the board. Celeste's hand froze on the door handle. What? You can't do that. Where am I supposed to go? Where you go is no longer my concern, Adrian said. He reached over and pressed the window control. Adrian. My heart. She gasped, clutching her chest, falling to her knees on the vetgreffel. It was the exact same posture, the exact same gasp she had used at the graduation, at the gala, at the anniversary dinner. Adrian watched her through the rising glass. His heart didn't accelerate. His hands didn't shake. Drive, he told the chauffeur. The car swerved smoothly around her crouching figure, leaving her alone in the cold rain as it sped toward the airport. Port Sterling in November was defined by fog and rain. The annual Vanguard Showcase at Northlake Academy was the biggest art event in the province, attracting gallery owners, collectors, and critics from across the country. The exhibition hall was in converted 19th-century brick warehouse on the harbor front, lit by warm, industrial hanging lamps. My collection, the terms of settlement, occupied the main wall of the central gallery. 6 massive canvases, displayed in chronological sequence. The first was a quiet, suffocating interior, a girl sitting at a long dinner table while 2 shadows merged in the background. The third was a brutal, striking image of an airport terminal at night, where a silver ring lay smashed beneath the heel of a leather boot. And the final piece, completed just 3 days prior, a self-portrait. In it, I stood on a rocky shore, looking out at a dark sea. The wind was whipping through my coat, my left arm bore a glowing, golden scar, and behind me a massive, ornate golden cage was sinking into the ocean waves. Critics were already standing in front of the final piece, taking notes, whispering among themselves. Raw, one woman with sharp glasses remarked to her colleague, unapologetically, decisive. There's no nostalgia here. It's an execution. I stood near the entrance of the private back room, wearing a simple dark velvet suit, holding a glass of sparkling water. Julian walked up beside me, leaning against the wall. 3 gallery owners have already offered to buy the entire series, he said smoothly. The Museum of Modern Art in Port Sterling wants the final piece for their permanent collection. I'm keeping the final piece, I said quietly. Julian smiled. I figured you would. Then, the heavy glass doors at the front of the exhibition hall opened. A cold draft swept into the warm room, carrying the smell of ocean fog. A man walked in. He wore a dark wool coat, his hair damp from the rain outside. He looked entirely out of place among the arts crowd, too rigid, too expensive, too aggressive. Adrian Hawthorne. He stopped in the center of the hall, his eyes searching the crowded room until they found me. The conversation around us seemed to fade into a dull hum. Adrian didn't look at the paintings. He didn't look at the critics, the lights, or the harbor outside. He walked straight through the crowd toward me, his heavy leather shoes striking the polished concrete floor with a steady, relentless beat. Julian shifted, taking a half step in front of me, but I extended a hand and gently touched his arm. It's fine, Julian, I whispered. Let him come. Adrian stopped 6 feet away. Up close he looked older. The sharp, immaculate edge he had cultivated for 30 years was gone. There were dark shadows beneath his eyes, his collar was slightly askew, and he smelled faintly of rain and stale coffee. He looked at me, taking in my suit, my hair, my composure, my unbandaged arm. Clara, he said. His voice was hoarse, rough, as if he hadn't used it in days. Mr. Hawthorne, I replied politely, leaning my back against the doorframe of the back room. I didn't know the Hawthorne Group bought contemporary art. The formal title, Mr. Hawthorne, hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, his jaw tightening. I came for you, he said, ignoring the people nearby who were starting to turn. And look at us. I've been trying to find you for 3 months. Your school blocked my calls. Your legal team refused my letters. Because I asked them to, I said calmly. He took a step closer, his eyes desperate, sweeping over my face. Clara, please, come outside with me. We need to talk. Just 10 minutes. That's all I'm asking. We have nothing to talk about, Adrian, I said, setting my glass of water down on a small table beside the door. Everything I had to say to you is hanging on that wall behind you. Adrian turned his head slowly, looking at the exhibition wall for the first time. His eyes moved from the first painting to the second, then stopped dead on the third piece, the one depicting the airport terminal, the smashed ring, and the watch reading 7:02. He stared at it for a long, agonizing moment. The surrounding guests, recognizing the subject matter from the local news stories that had plagued Cedarhaven for months, began to whisper, pointing at the painting and then at Adrian. Is that Adrian Hawthorne? The guy from the corporate scandal? Look at the watch in the painting. That's brutal. Adrian turned back to me, his face pale, his breath coming in short, uneven hitches. Is this how you see me? He whispered. A cage? A warden? No, I said, meeting his gaze directly without a flicker of fear or anger. A warden is someone you fear. You were just a mistake I took 3 years to correct. A mistake? Adrian repeated. The word seemed to shatter whatever small thread of composure he had left. He stepped forward, reaching out to grasp my hand, but I stepped back into the private room, out of his reach. Clara, I dropped everything. He shouted, his voice echoing through the gallery, drawing every eye in the building. I cut Celeste off. I sold the North Star apartment. I fired Marcus from the board. I did everything you wanted me to do. I didn't ask you to do any of those things, Adrian, I said softly, standing in the doorway of the quiet room. I asked you to choose me 3 years ago. You didn't. Doing it now isn't loyalty, it's damage control. It's not damage control. I love you, he roared, tears finally welling in his bloodshot eyes. I realized at the moment that plane took off. Celeste. Don't care about the family name, I don't care about the company, I don't care about anything if you're not in that apartment when I come home. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small worn velvet box, not the new one from the gala, but an old simple box I recognized. Instantly, the engagement ring his father had given his mother 30 years ago. Marry me, Adrian begged, dropping to one knee right there on the polished concrete floor of the gallery, before 50 strangers, before the critics, before the world. Come back to Cedarhaven. We'll start over. I'll give you everything. I'll put the company in your name. Just come home, Clara. The gallery went dead silent. Cameras flashed as a few reporters in the crowd lifted their phones. A billionaire CEO kneeling in the dirt, begging an 18-year-old artist for a second chance. It was the kind of grand, cinematic gesture Adrian had always believed could fix anything. He thought love was a transaction, that if the price was high enough, if the humiliation was public enough, he could purchase my forgiveness. I stood above him, looking down at the man on his knees. I felt no satisfaction. I felt no triumph. I only felt a profound, overwhelming sense of pity. Get up, Adrian, I said quietly. Not until you say yes, he wept, holding the ring up with hands that shook violently. Please, Clara, give me one more chance. Just one. I looked at the ring, then looked into his eyes. Do you know why I deleted the photo on Celeste's lock screen? I asked him. He blinked, caught off guard. What? July 2nd, I said softly. The photo was taken the day she divorced Marcus. She wrote finally free. And beneath your watch, you engraved the same date. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. You thought you were protecting her. I continued, my voice steady, clear, and utterly cold. You thought you were being a hero. But the truth is, Adrian, you loved the feeling of being her savior more than you ever loved me. I was just the quiet, understanding girl who waited at home while you played your noble tragedy. I stepped back, further into the room. I am no longer waiting. And I will never go back to Cedarhaven. Clara, he screamed as Julian stepped into the doorway, quietly closing the heavy oak door between us. Outside, the security guards hired for the event finally stepped in, escorting the shouting, weeping CEO out into the cold Port Sterling rain. I stood inside the quiet back room, listening to his voice fade away down the corridor until there was nothing left but the sound of rain tapping against the skylight above. Julian looked at me gently. Are you all right? I looked down at my hands. They were steady. My heart was beating with a slow, peaceful rhythm. I'm fine, I said. I pulled my coat from the chair, wrapped my scarf around my neck, and walked out the back exit of the warehouse into the misty harbor air. The rain was light, cool against my cheeks. I walked along the wooden boardwalk, watching the ferry boats navigate through the fog, their yellow lanterns casting long, beautiful streaks of light across the dark water. My phone chimed in my pocket. It was a notification from the Northlake Academy portal. My final portfolio had been awarded the Governor's Gold Medal for Contemporary Art, the highest honor given to an undergraduate student in the province, complete with a full grant for a 3-year residency in Paris. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Then I tucked the phone back into my pocket, lifted my head and kept walking forward into the cool, salt-scented night. Epilogue, 3 years later. Paris, France. The gallery on Rue de Turin was filled with light. Large glass windows overlooked a courtyard filled with blooming white hydrangeas. The air smelled of espresso, fresh bread, and damp stone. A solo exhibition poster hung near the entrance, featuring a bold, striking oil painting of a woman standing atop a high cliff, holding a paintbrush like a spear against a storm-gray sky. Beneath the image were the words, Clara Lee, the architecture of freedom. Inside, a crowd of international collectors, critics, and art lovers moved between 30 massive canvases. I sat at a small bistro table in the courtyard, wearing a cream linen suit, sipping black coffee, chatting with a gallery director from London. Your work has evolved immensely over the last 3 years, Ms. Lee, the director said, gesturing toward the main room. The early pieces were about escape, about breaking away. But these new ones, they are about sovereignty. Sovereignty. I repeated the word, liking the weight of it. Yes, that's a good word for it. A young assistant walked out to the courtyard, holding a thick leather mail folder. Ms. Lee, the assistant said in French. A package arrived for you from Cedarhaven. I paused, setting my coffee cup down. Cedarhaven. Yes, it was sent through a legal firm. I opened the folder. Inside was a single copy of a regional business newspaper from Cedarhaven dated 2 months prior. On the front page was a small, subdued article. Hawthorne Group completes restructuring. Former CEO Adrian Hawthorne retires permanently from corporate board. Below the headline was a small photograph of Adrian leaving the courthouse. Looked thin, his hair silvering at the temples, wearing a plain suit, walking alone toward a waiting car. There was no letter, No message. Just the newspaper, sent by a legal executor, settling the final accounts of his estate. I looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then I folded the newspaper, placed it neatly into the recycling bin beside the table, and picked up my coffee cup again. The sun broke through the Parisian clouds, casting bright, warm golden light across the courtyard flowers. Where were we, monsieur? I asked the gallery director with a gentle, genuine smile. We were discussing your next show in New York, he replied, raising his glass to me. I smiled, looking out at the bright sky, completely, beautifully free.